Are y'all familiar with Down the Rabbit Hole? He or they is or are a content creator on YouTube who makes documentaries on lesser explored topics like Mr. Henry Darger and the Collier Brothers of New York, good old Chris Chan, and many more strange and intriguing topics, oddities, if you will, ripe for the trading. I bring this up because I like their content and want to do what little I can to promote their channel, and that they are the ones who presented me with today's reading. Through late April and into July of 2016, nonsensical posts began to pop up on any which thread all over Reddit by the user 9mother 9horse 9eyes 9. They were vignettes that told about secret government projects and experiments conducted in absolute secrecy within that moral gray area that would make my skin crawl if I had skin. Out of context, these posts seemed like the rambling of a madman going on about his night terrors that racked his fractured psyche. But some Redditors got the idea to compile these posts and discovered that they were chapters in a much larger, much scarier story. Our reading today will be the first 5 posts from 9M9H99, entitled The Interface Series.
A. Unite. A. Stage. A. Evolution. A. Ring. A. Transform. A. New World. A. Unite. A. Stage.
In the MKUltra experiments, the CIA dosed unwitting subjects with LSD to see how they would react. What has not yet come to light is that MKUltra was an intra-agency project. The CIA created new departments within the CIA and fed them steady doses of LSD and other psychoactives to see how the departments would diverge and mutate away from normal departments. Whole projects and hierarchies were created with everyone involved being more or less unwittingly under the influence of LSD. This is how the restraint bed portals and the flesh interfaces were first created, i.e. from heavy psycho-mutated hierarchy. The entire thing had to be eliminated, but the technology it created was revolutionary. In Vietnam, the US government tried to pacify the country village by village using the Strategic Hamlet program, basically creating villages where there was no or little Viet Cong influence. They tried more extreme experiments where they completely isolated villages or groups of villages, allowing nobody to enter or exit for periods of up to 4 years. In some of the villages, people simply starved to death. In other, more self-sufficient villages, the people managed to scrape by. It was noted that in many of the villages where this technique was tried, Messianic or millenarian movements sprang up. In 16 separate incidences, villages were able to independently invent flesh interfaces and non-electrical portals, and it was surmised that these villages were being collectively dosed with LSD for long periods of time, and their intellectual mutations allowed for these advances. The flesh interfaces were eventually destroyed by the North Vietnamese army at a terrible cost of lives. I'm surprised they used nuclear subs in the Falklands, considering the battle's proximity to the undersea incident zone surrounding the so-called Arcticus portal. As I understand it, the portal was opened because of experiments taking place in the CIA's Antarctic station in the early 80s, and Falklands quickly became a center for portal research. Being underwater, the portal had an enormous incident zone, and segmented whales and other undersea debris would regularly wash up on the island's shores. They found one whale that had been segmented clearly in half by an incident zone disturbance, proving a perfect cross-section of the creature. They also found hundreds of the chitinous cruciform creatures, certainly non-terrestrial of origin. Anyway, if a nuclear sub had wandered into the incident zone, it could have been disastrous, but I guess they considered the risk acceptable.
Genocide.
The Soviets designated large portions of the Ukraine countryside as harvest populations. Basically, Their food and water supplies were dosed with LSD until they had achieved what the Soviets called integration. This meant the local population had independently invented flesh interfaces. The Soviet army would then quarantine the area and try to remove the flesh interfaces for their own use. This was usually without success and with great loss of life. Many of the soldiers and scientists were segmented, as often happens in an incident zone, so they ended up with people missing limbs, cut in half, etc. What's interesting is that the people could live for quite some time despite segmentation. This is what led the Soviets to believe that their missing body parts still existed, albeit in some unknown place. So, one of the leading theories of the time was interdimensionality. Quite mistaken. Dubai has probably the highest rate of free-floating, non-interface incidents of any major metropolitan area in the world. In one incident, a large group of migrant workers was segmented in an underground facility. Perfect cross-sectional segmentation along the frontal plane. You could see their lungs working, food being digested, blood pumping on the inside of the heart, everything. They lived for almost 5 months in this condition. Absolutely fascinating to see in person. There was also a group of school children who were very slightly segmented, just ends of fingers and bits of the calves and such. Hardly fatal wounds, yet they all died within 2 months. Some showed signs of intellectual mutation. There are no known flesh interfaces in Dubai. However, it is surmised that the architecture is actually based on interface geometry and carries some latent interface-like powers. Mass segmentations remain one of the most mysterious aspects of these interfaces. They seem to show that the interfaces do indeed concentrate on flesh, living up to their name. I highly suggest going and reading the whole story. I'll have the link in the description. Sci-fi horror is something that greatly interests me, especially in a literary format like this, and I like what the author does in breaking up the story, because it really makes it difficult to piece together, and really kind of gives off the whole atmosphere that we don't know what we're messing with quite yet. And I like that a lot as a story. So, I believe that will end our reading here for tonight. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed making it, so I will have another reading out fairly soon. The boys are knocking down my door waiting to try out those brand new shiny cattle prods I bought them, but I don't think they're gonna get a chance to use it. You hear that, assholes? They're mad at me. They're very mad at me. Anyway, I'll see you next time with another wonderful reading. Toodles!